They say the mountains don't care about you. They don't know your name, your experience level, your family back home. They'll kill you without a second thought. I've always respected that brutal honesty. It's part of why I climb. My name's Kellen. I've been mountaineering for over a decade. First as a hobby, then professionally. When I'm not guiding clients or testing gear for brands, I run a modest blog where I write about the technical aspects of climbing, the philosophy behind it, and the strange meditative headspace you drop into when the only thing between you and a 1,000-foot fall is the rhythm of your own breathing. So when I got an email from a company I'd worked with before, a gear brand trying to make a splash, inviting me on a sponsored climb of a peak I'd never even heard of, I was intrigued. Summit 9, they called it. No official name, just a placeholder in some outdated mountaineering registry, nestled in a jagged spur of the Ogilvie Mountains in Yukon Territory. Barely any recorded attempts. No successful ascents logged. I checked topographical maps and satellite views. It was remote, truly remote. No access roads, no nearby outposts. Just glacial valleys and twisted ridgelines covered in snow even through the summer. That should have been a red flag, I guess. But to me, it was catnip, a mountain barely touched. It felt like a final frontier in a world where most summits have been Instagrammed to death. There were 6 of us. None of us knew each other personally, but we'd all been vetted, apparently. The team consisted of a polar survival instructor from Norway, a South Korean alpine speed climber, a Canadian glaciologist, a UK-based expedition medic, and a Russian climber known for his solo ascents in Siberia. And me, the semi-journalist with a GoPro helmet and a decent following. We met in Dawson City, flew by bush plane to a small clearing near a frozen riverbed, then hiked 3 days just to reach base camp. Summit 9 stood above us like a broken tooth, jagged and stark against a gray sky. Wind ripped across the ridgeline above base, scattering powder snow into the air like ash. There was no trail, no established route, just the sharp divide of ice and rock. The first day of ascent went smoothly. We found a line along a series of ice shelves leading toward the lower saddle. The climb was technical but manageable. No drama. Spirits were high. It wasn't until the radios began acting up on day 2 that something felt off. We were using shortwave handsets to communicate across rope teams. Tried and tested gear. At first, it was just static. It became something stranger. A pulsing rhythm, almost like breathing through a speaker. It would interrupt transmissions mid-sentence. Once or twice, someone thought they heard a voice through the fuzz, repeating a single word in a language no one could place. We chalked it up to interference, maybe atmospheric conditions bouncing signals back, but that didn't explain the low-frequency hum that lingered even when the radios were off. Then there were the scratches. On the morning of day 3, one of the climbers, Tomo, the Korean athlete, emerged from his tent with red welts running down his forearm. 3 parallel lines, deep enough to welt but not bleed. They hadn't been there the night before. No one said much about it, but we all noticed. He laughed it off. Still, I saw the way his eyes darted to the edge of camp, where the snow met the shadows of the ridge. He wasn't convinced he had scratched himself on a zipper. That same day, I began to feel the weight of silence pressing in. I've spent weeks in the wilderness, completely isolated from civilization. I know the sounds of solitude, the groan of shifting ice, the distant crack of falling rock, the hush of snowfall. But this was different. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. That night, the wind died completely. No gusts, no chill sweeping through the tents, just stillness. I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes open, not sure if I was waiting for something or trying not to hear it. Despite it all, we pushed on. There's a momentum in climbing, a kind of stubborn inertia. When you've come that far, the summit becomes more than a goal. It becomes an obsession. The weather was starting to turn, but we calculated we had a narrow window. One last push. We began at first light on day 4, climbing a near-vertical couloir that cut through the upper face like a frozen throat. The snow was firm, the ice biting well. No one spoke much. Something had shifted in the group's energy. Maybe it was fatigue, or maybe that subtle tension had grown into something heavier. I kept glancing at the surrounding peaks. They seemed closer than before, or taller. I couldn't quite explain it. like the landscape had warped around us, subtly rearranged itself. At 2:17 p.m., we crested the final ridge. The summit of 9 was a narrow platform of jagged ice and exposed rock. From it, we could see the vast, undisturbed sweep of wilderness in every direction. No towns, no smoke, just mountains. Peaks faded into the horizon like a frozen sea. Someone let out a whoop. Another raised their axe triumphantly. I forced a smile, pulled out my camera, and recorded a short clip. But behind my lens, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The sky was wrong. It wasn't stormy, not yet. There were clouds, yes, but not the fast-moving threat we'd expected. It was the color that unsettled me, a kind of flat gray that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. The sun hung just above the horizon, but its light felt muffled. And then the wind stopped again, completely, like someone had closed the door on the atmosphere itself. We all noticed it, the way we stood there, blinking. The sudden absence of sound made everything feel distant, like we'd stepped inside a sealed room. My own breathing felt loud in my ears. I could hear the snow compact under my boots, my heartbeat echoing inside my skull. That's when I realized no one was talking, not celebrating, just staring. Something about that moment, on what should have been the high point of triumph, felt utterly, deeply wrong. I took one last photo, not of the view, but of the group. 5 climbers standing in the stillness, their silhouettes sharp against the lightless sky. The image would come back to me later, hauntingly, because by then, 2 of those people would be gone, and something else would be circling our camp. Something that never left tracks going in, only out. The descent should have brought relief. After the summit, the worst was supposed to be over. But as we made our way down the northern flank, the mood had soured, muted, withdrawn. It wasn't just fatigue. I'd felt that before, the weight of spent adrenaline and aching muscles after a brutal climb. This was different. It was something unspoken clinging to us, like the way snow clings to boots long after you've stepped indoors. Our base camp came into view late in the afternoon, nestled in the shadow of a glacier-stained ridgeline. The wind was beginning to pick up again, whispering across the ice fields in gusts that sent powder rolling across the slopes like smoke. We were maybe 2 hours from losing the light when we noticed the tents, or what was left of them. From a distance, it looked like someone had packed up in a rush. The shapes were collapsed, nylon flattened against the snow. But as we drew closer, the damage became unmistakable. The tents hadn't been disassembled. They'd been torn apart. The slashes were long, clean, and vicious. Fabric flapped like skin peeled from bone. Gear was scattered, sleeping bags dragged into the snow, cooking pots buried in fresh powder, fuel canisters upended. But nothing was missing, not a single item stolen. No food taken, no footprints leading in or out. Just chaos, intentional but incomplete, like someone had wanted to send a message, not destroy. We moved slowly, processing. One of the climbers, Jack, the British medic, walked a wide perimeter and was the first to spot the marks. He didn't call out, didn't even gesture, just stared, until the rest of us followed his line of sight. Encircling the remnants of our base camp were strange indentations in the snow. They looked almost like claw marks, long, narrow impressions, 5 at a time, arcing together in evenly spaced curves. The circles were perfect, not broken, not staggered, just long, uninterrupted loops. 3 of them, each a few meters apart, surrounding us like a set of drawn boundaries. There were no signs of approach, no tracks breaking through the perimeter, no drag marks, no bullet prints, just the circles. For a while, no one said anything. It was that same hush from the summit, like sound didn't want to exist here. Eventually, a theory was offered. Wolves. Maybe mountain lions. Something curious, testing the edges. But even the person who suggested it couldn't sell the idea convincingly. The spacing was too clean. The arc of the patterns too wide, too symmetrical. Even a large predator wouldn't stalk a camp in mathematically perfect loops. Another theory followed. Wind. Maybe snow sloughing off the ridge in spirals. But the snow hadn't drifted or shifted. It had been pressed. Pressed. That word stayed in my mind long after we started salvaging what we could. It felt wrong, like something had settled onto the snow without stepping, a weight without motion, a presence without approach. By dusk, we'd agreed to stay the night and descend at first light. There was no real discussion, just nods and downcast eyes. The terrain below was dangerous in low visibility, and the storm clouds were already sliding in across the valley. We knew the smart move was to rest, regroup, and go at dawn. So we rebuilt camp, rigged emergency bivvies from what tents we had left, shared supplies, rotated stove duty to melt snow for water. And all the while, those circles stayed just at the edge of our vision. Immaculate, undisturbed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag, ears straining for sound. The wind had returned, but only in brief whispers, like something sighing through the trees. The others were equally restless, shifting, adjusting gear, breathing heavy in the dark. No one was willing to say it, but we all felt it. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was expectation. Sometime after midnight, I sat up and unzipped the side of my bivvy just enough to peer out. The moon was high, veiled, but bright enough to cast pale blue light over the snow. And there they were. The circles had returned. Only this time, they were closer. I counted 4, then 5. All of them nested tighter than before, some no more than a meter from the tent flaps. The claw marks were deeper now, pressed with more force. The grooves carved into the snow with deliberate precision, as though etched by something with fingers far longer than any animal I'd seen. Each arc seemed to curve inward slightly, as if drawn by something pacing, not around but toward. And again, no tracks, nothing to show how they'd been made. Just the marks. A sense of exposure swept over me. Not fear, not yet, just the overwhelming feeling of being seen, as if I were lying beneath a glass dome with no way to hide. I looked up instinctively at the ridgeline, the shadows, the stars, and felt something tighten in my chest. It wasn't just circling, it was watching. I tried to calm my breathing, to rationalize, but my mind was already racing. I wasn't new to the paranoia of altitude. Sleep deprivation, oxygen levels, cold, those things could mess with you. But this didn't feel like my mind playing tricks. It felt external, like an intelligence just outside of sight, hovering just beyond comprehension. One of the others stirred. I heard a zipper, another person shifting. Nobody said anything. Then someone, in a whisper just loud enough to carry, murmured the words that kept me awake for the rest of the night. It's not afraid. It's playing with us. That was the moment the mood shifted entirely. We weren't in control anymore. We weren't surviving the mountain. We were enduring something else entirely. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there, unmoving, eyes fixed on the seams of my bivvy, listening for anything out of place. No howls, no rustling, just the windless hush and the growing sense that something was circling us not out of curiosity, but anticipation. By the time the first gray light began bleeding across the eastern ridge, the air was still. Not calm, still. The kind of stillness that follows disaster, when even the wind holds its breath. I sat up slowly, my joints stiff from the cold, heart still pounding from the previous night's revelations. The circles had remained where they were, carved into the snow like warning signs left in the dark. At some point, I must have dozed off, though I didn't remember sleeping. Just blinking. Once, movement rustled to my left. Jack stirred, unzipping his bivvy, blinking toward the light. He looked older, somehow, face pale, drawn tight around his eyes. Someone else stood, brushing frost from their coat, already scanning the camp. It was Amir. That's when the mood shifted again. We noticed it first in a way no one was moving near the second bivvy. A low-angle dome made from torn fabric and layered gear. Jenna's. Her spot. Someone called her name, half-heartedly, then more urgently. When the flap was pulled back, what we saw made the cold settle deeper inside all of us. The sleeping bag was shredded from the inside. Not torn at the zipper or slashed like the tents. This was frantic. The insulation was scattered, her mat rolled in on itself, and the bag looked as if it had been clawed open by someone, or something desperate to get out. But Jenna was gone. No footprints, no trail, no sign of a struggle, just absence. The snow around her bivvy was untouched, except for the still visible claw circle, now inches from where her head had been. As if it had stopped there, waiting, panic settled in slowly. Not with screams, but with confusion, the way minds begin to bend when something doesn't make sense. Suggestions were flung into the air, rapid fire, and mostly irrational. Maybe she had wandered off, delirious from altitude. Maybe she had a mental break, sleepwalking, hypothermia. But none of those things explained the bag, or the way the snow around her bivvy looked completely undisturbed. She couldn't have left without leaving tracks. The debate fractured the group. Some insisted we had to search, form a grid, sweep the surrounding ridge lines, check crevices. Others were already packing. We'd seen too much. Something wasn't natural about this place. I felt paralyzed. Logic strained against instinct. My rational brain told me to search, to act. But something deeper, older, whispered a warning. She didn't leave. She was taken. Eventually, I joined Amir in scouting the treeline just west of camp. It was a quiet agreement, no plan, just motion. We walked slowly, the snow crunching faintly beneath our crampons. The trees ahead formed a dense cluster of ice-coated pine and skeletal birch, their trunks blackened by frost and shadow. No birzon, no movement. About 200 meters from camp, Amir paused. His boot had caught on something buried beneath a light drift. He crouched, brushed the snow aside, and froze. Jenna's coat. It was partially buried, stiff with frost, but unmistakable. One sleeve was torn near the elbow, and the front zipper had been bent sideways, as if something had twisted it. Beneath the coat, stuffed into the inner lining, was a small digital camera. It beeped when powered on, the lens grinding slightly from exposure. We checked the images, bracing ourselves for anything. Most were typical shots from earlier in the trip, summit selfies, group photos, and some of the claw circles taken with shaking hands. But the final photo stopped everything. It was grainy, poorly lit, clearly taken at night. The angle showed our camp from a distance, likely from the trees. In the foreground was the familiar curve of the tents, glowing faintly from the headlamps we'd hung inside. But to the left of the frame, just beyond the reach of light, was a figure. Tall, wrongly proportioned, a silhouette against the snow. It stood perfectly still, its outline distorted by motion blur, but distinct enough to see elongated limbs, a neck that seemed too long, and something that could have been antlers or twisted branches rising from its head. It wasn't facing the camp. It was facing the camera. We stared for a long time before turning back. Neither of us spoke. The snow seemed louder underfoot now, the trees more narrow. As we approached the edge of the clearing where base camp should have been, something felt off. It took a moment to realize the camp was different, half collapsed, as if a windstorm had swept through. But there was no wind. The others were scrambling, gear scattered again, another tent flattened. And David, one of the quieter members of the group, was on his knees in the snow, rocking back and forth, hands pressed his face. He was mumbling, repeating something over and over, his voice just above a whisper. He wouldn't look at anyone, wouldn't respond. Only when someone placed a hand on his shoulder did he snap, shoving them away violently, eyes wide and wet. For what we could piece together, he'd seen something while we were gone. He claimed Jenna had returned, said she was walking along the outer circle barefoot, her face turned toward the ground, whispering something he couldn't understand. Said her eyes were closed and her feet never quite touched the snow. She disappeared behind one of the tents. When he followed, she was gone. Again, that was when he broke. We didn't waste any more time. The group clustered around the radio, trying to raise our emergency contact on the other side of the range. The signal was weak, nothing but static and the occasional burst of garbled voice. We changed channels, switched frequencies. Jack held the antenna as high as he could, waving it like a conductor's baton, hoping for a miracle. Then something cut through. It was faint, buried in the noise, but clear enough to freeze all of us in place. Not a transmission, not a voice from any rescue team, just a whisper. It rasped between pulses of static, as though spoken just beside the microphone. Words carried on the edge of breath. You brought it with you. The radio fell silent after that. No repeat. No sound. Just the snow around us and the wind returning to gnaw at the edges of camp. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. For the first time, I allowed myself to think it out loud. We were being hunted, but not by something of this world. And now it knew we knew. We began the descent in silence. There was no ceremony, no final glance back at the summit, no words for Jenna or the madness we were leaving behind. Just the quiet sound of boots crunching through half-packed snow and the strained creak of overloaded gear. Each of us moved as though pulled by invisible strings, going through the practiced motions of survival. The mountain didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like something that had noticed us and wasn't ready to let us go. The route down was supposed to be straightforward. We'd planned it on the way up, marking a path along the eastern slope that led toward a valley where, according to our map, an old ranger outpost lay, tucked near a frozen creek. It wasn't staffed this time of year, but it had a satellite phone, a beacon, safety. That was all we wanted now, distance and a call for help. But the mountain had changed. Within the first hour, we began to notice the time slipping. At first, it was little things. Watches ticking too quickly or not at all. Sunrise had been slow to crest the ridges, but now shadows stretched too long for the hour. My own watch read just past 10, but Jack's claimed it was nearly noon. Amir's was dead entirely. We pressed on, trusting the GPS instead, though even it seemed confused, the map stuttering as if unsure of where we stood. It wasn't until late afternoon that we found the circles again. They were there, just ahead of a natural choke point where the ridge narrowed. The snow was untouched otherwise. The circles hadn't been made by anything passing through. They were waiting for us. 4 of them, wider now, carved deeper. One ring sat directly in our path, as if daring us to step through it. No one did. We took the long way around, detouring along a steep sidewall until we reconnected with our intended line. The detour cost us more time, at least another hour by our best guess. But when we crested the next ridge, we saw something that shattered any remaining belief that we still understood what was happening. There was a camp in the valley below. At first, it brought relief. Another group? A rescue team? Maybe? The tents were upright, flapping faintly in the wind, catching the dying orange light of sunset. Smoke rose from a small cook fire. It looked peaceful. Then Jack stopped, pointing to the flag marker stuck in the snow just outside the main tent. It was ours. The flag was red, frayed at the top corner. We had marked it ourselves when we'd first established base, 4 days ago before the summit. Everything was the same. The layout, the gear, even the placement of a dented fuel canister that had been knocked over and left untouched in our rush to prep for the climb. It was all there, exactly as we had left it. We stood motionless on the ridge, watching it, trying to understand. We descended over 20 miles. We had crossed terrain we had never passed before. The GPS confirmed it. We couldn't be anywhere near our original base. But there it was, undisturbed, waiting. Accusations came quickly. One of the climbers, Nikolai, turned on me, his eyes wild. He claimed I'd led us in a circle, that I was holding the wrong heading, that I wanted to keep us here. I didn't even argue. There was no point. The horror of what we were seeing had already infected us, turning us against each other. Amir checked the GPS again. He showed the screen, shaking. We had moved far, too far, from the original camp. There was no way this could be the same place. And yet it was. We approached it as night fell, more from necessity than desire. Temperatures were dropping fast, and we had nowhere else to go. No other shelter. We set up quickly, stuffing ourselves back into the same gear we'd left behind days earlier. None of us acknowledged the impossible. The sleeping bags still carried the impressions of our bodies. One had Jenna's initials stitched in the corner. She should have still been inside. That night, the wind returned. It howled with purpose, rising and falling like breath. The tents rattled. Snow flurried against the walls. We stayed huddled close, but even then, the cold didn't feel like something external. It felt like it came from the inside out. At some point past midnight, I woke to an unnatural stillness. A different kind than before. Not silence, emptiness. I unzipped my tent slowly. The moonlight revealed what I had feared most. The claw circles were back. Only now they were inside the perimeter, surrounding the tents in tight coils, like a trap being cinched shut. One of the rings curved just inches from my own tent. Another passed directly over a line of boot prints that hadn't been there earlier. I scanned the camp. 2 sleeping bags were missing. Panic flooded through me. I rushed to the other tents, pulling back flaps, checking each one. Gone. No blood. No straged. Just the impression of where bodies had lain moments before, and now, nothing. 2 names I knew too well. Jack and Nikolai. Both gone without a sound. Someone screamed then. Amir. He'd woken to find his tent door open, frost layering the inside, the scent of something metallic in the air. We gathered what we could, closed off the gaps, tried to pretend we were still alive. Still real. But I didn't sleep. Not until exhaustion crushed me under its weight. When I did dream, it came all at once, sharp and clear like memory. I stood alone on the summit. Not during the climb. This was now. The snow was untouched. The wind had vanished. Around me stood the others, spaced evenly, each frozen mid-step. Eyes open. Mouths agape. Not breathing. Jenna. Jack. Nikolai. David. Amir. They weren't looking at me. They were looking above me. I turned slowly. The figure stood at the peak. Towering. Thin. A silhouette draped in long, ragged folds of black that moved with no wind. Its arms dangled low, past its knees. Its head was wrong. Too long, too narrow. Antlers, maybe, but more like branches, brittle and tangled. Its mouth opened. I expected a roar. A scream. Instead, it whispered. Through broken teeth, too many for human face, it rasped one sentence. You should not have looked down. I woke choking on my own breath, the frost in the tent now thick on the inner walls. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I didn't know where we were anymore, or if we had ever truly left the summit at all. By morning, only Amir and I remained. David had vanished sometime between the gray hours of dawn and full light, his tent flap wide open, his pack undisturbed. No prints, no sound, just gone, as if he'd been pulled out of the world without effort or explanation. We didn't talk about it. There was nothing left to say. Amir and I moved like shadows down the ice field, following what was supposed to be our final descent path toward the eastern valley, towards safety, or whatever passed for it now. The GPS was useless. The terrain didn't match the maps anymore. Landmarks twisted or vanished. Rock formations reappeared in places they shouldn't have been. Paths forked where there had never been trails before. Eventually, the slope ended. Not in a valley like we'd hoped, but at a sheer drop. A cliff face carved out of stone that shouldn't have existed. It was like the mountain had birthed a new edge overnight, blocking our escape in a brutal final gesture. We stood there in disbelief, gazing out over the yawning void, the land below lost beneath clouds that churned without moving. There were no birds, no wind, just us, 2 men wrapped in layers of sweat-soaked gear, barely able to stand, surrounded by snow that whispered without a voice. Amir said nothing at first, only sat heavily against a rock that jutted from the snow like a broken tooth. I watched him fidget with his gloves, his face drawn, his eyes dull. Then he looked at me with something that hovered between confession and resignation. He had been here before. Not physically, not exactly, but in a dream, a memory, a place he had seen years ago, maybe even lived through. A hallucination he'd chalked up to exhaustion during another expedition, a climb that had ended with frostbite and a fractured leg. He'd written it off, buried it under other traumas, until the sponsor reached out again. Same company, same contract, same vague terms and high pay. The invitation to Summit 9 had sparked a feeling he couldn't place then, but now remembered all too clearly. The claw circles, the vanishing paths, the silence. He had thought it was all just a dream, but dreams don't send emails. We set camp one last time at the edge of the impossible cliff. The night came quickly, like it had been waiting. The sun dipped behind a ridge, and everything turned the color of bruised metal. We didn't speak, didn't eat. There was no appetite for food or hope, just the sound of our breath and the low groan of ice shifting deep within a mountain's bones. I woke to movement. Not sound, movement. The kind you feel more than hear. The snow was stirring just beyond the edge of the tent, swirling in lazy circles. Amir's sleeping bag lay beside mine, empty, its zippered mouth yawning open like a wound. I stayed frozen, eyes wide in the dark, too afraid to move. A shape dragged across the snow just beyond the tent flap. Long, slow, deliberate. Not footsteps. Something smoother. Weight being pulled, not walked. I turned my head ever so slightly, and through a crack in the fabric, I saw Amir being taken. He wasn't struggling. His eyes were open, staring straight up at the stars, or whatever hung in their place. His mouth moved, silently, repeating something I couldn't hear. A trail cut behind him in the snow, but it filled in as quickly as it formed, erasing him moment by moment until there was nothing left but smooth white and a silence deeper than the cold. I didn't move until the sun touched the far peak. By then, I was the only one. Something in me shifted after that. Fear had long passed. What remained was something emptier, resignation maybe. A bone-deep understanding that I couldn't escape this place. But I could return to the place it all started. To the eye of the storm, the place that first looked back. I began the ascent again. Every part of my body screamed against the effort. My legs were lead, my breath shallow, hands numb. The weather didn't fight me this time. There were no gusts, no frostbite warnings. Only quiet, as if the mountain wanted me back. The climb took hours, or minutes, or days. Time no longer passed in any way I could understand. When I reached the summit again, it welcomed me like a returning guest. There was no wind, no clouds, just snow untouched and silence so profound it felt alive. The claw marks were waiting. Only now, they were different. No longer circling the camp. No longer pacing the edges. They spiraled inward, narrow, deliberate, like the ridges of a fingerprint etched in white. They ended at the center of the peak, at a small cairn of stones. It hadn't been there before. I approached slowly. My boots didn't crunch. The snow yielded without sound, like ash. The cairn was crudely built, no more than a pile of jagged rocks, stacked chest-high. At the top sat something dark, leather-bound, worn, a journal. My fingers shook as I opened it, snow-dusted gloves peeling back the cover. Inside, the pages were stiff and damp. Every one of them was filled with the same phrase, written in looping, desperate script. I watched, over and over, sometimes smudged, sometimes etched so hard the page tore beneath it. Page after page, no deviation, until the very last. There, scrawled at the bottom, in a hand I knew instantly to be mine. If you're reading this, it's too late. The summit is watching you now. I looked up. The sky was the same color as bone. The snow was undisturbed behind me. No footprints, no trail, only the spirals. And somewhere in that impossible quiet, something unseen began to whisper my name.